Stealing from Bradley Jerzak's his contemplation on today's parable. He has this contemplation that is called "Those Damned Goats," and it's about the goats that are damned to the fires of hell, or so goes the common refrain of this. And so we're gonna look at some goats here in a little bit. Last week, though, I introduced fearless reading. And it's this understanding that God isn't concerned with us being right so much as he's concerned with us knowing that we're loved. And his perfect love casts out all fear. So that now we get to explore with excitement. We don't explore with fear that we're going to get it wrong and then God's going to be angry, and if we get it wrong, then everything's messed up. Jesus says, no, I want you to know first and foremost, you're loved. We've come to this parable of the sheep and the goats, and some Bible translations, they title this final parable of Jesus, the final judgment. And it can seem scary, and maybe it is about final judgment, or as parables do, maybe it takes a picture from our mind of something like final judgment to teach us something entirely separate. I leave it up to you to decide. One of the problems we face, though, is that the titles in our Bibles aren't in the actual manuscripts. So when they title something, it can mislead us at times, but we're going to take a look at this. And another problem that we face is if this is final judgment, the problem is that the judgment doesn't involve whether you prayed a special prayer, brought Jesus into your heart, or believed the right theology. The definitive judgment here is established upon how you treated other people. Even more specifically, you're not judged in how well you knew. Sorry, my note's getting messed up there. You're not even judged in how well you knew who Jesus was. Because neither the sheep or the goats in the parable even understood they were seeing Jesus when Jesus claims they were encountering him. Both parties are naive to who Jesus is. This parable is the conclusion of Jesus' last discourse in his last public teaching before he dies. It's this picture of judgment where Jesus sits on his throne and he separates before him the sheep from the goats. He puts the sheep on his right and he says to them, "Come into the kingdom that has been prepared for you since the foundation of the world, because you loved me with acts of mercy." That's the thread of love and mercy that we're not to let grow cold. And it runs through these parables. Jesus tells the sheep, "You loved me with these acts of mercy. You fed me when I was hungry. You gave me something to drink when I was thirsty. You welcomed me when I was a foreigner. You clothed me when I was naked and cared for me when I was sick. And when I was in prison, you visited me." And the sheep, they ask, "Wait, when did we meet you? When did we do this for you?" And Jesus responds, "What you do to any of those who are in need, those who are foreigners, those who are sick and prisoners among you, you do it to me." And then Jesus says to the goats, "When I was in need and I was a foreigner, when I was sick, when I was imprisoned, you didn't care for me." And the goats are going to say, "Wait, when were you in that situation? If we would have known it was you, of course we would have helped you. If it was you, we would have cared for you, but when were you any of those people?" And Jesus responds, "What you don't do for any one of those people, you don't do it for me." Christ is in union with the vulnerable people in this world. Jesus marries his identity to anyone among us who is under the power of other people who are in places of authority. Jesus came not to be served, but to serve. And Jesus remains among us serving still, as those with needs around us. We sit in judgment of the needy among us. We can ask questions like, Did they get there by their own screw-ups? Are they remaining there by their own issues? Are they really in need? Are each of us ready to be judged by the same standard for our needs? Are each of us ready to be cut off from being seen as in need and worthy of support based upon how much we're still messing up? RFK Jr. this week with the Department of Health, he opened the door this week to a question. Do those who are actually choosing to consume unhealthy amounts of donuts and soda, do they deserve health care? Do they deserve our free health care? They're making themselves sick. And are we going to love them? This is coming from an era when we understand the addictive qualities of sugar, especially for depressed people. But the man who speaks of gaining freedom from his own addictions, he seems to hold little empathy for those who might be in their own sugar addictions. I believe it's difficult because we're quick to condemn the sin in others, especially when it's different than our own. We can't empathize with it. My personal experience with addiction to painkillers was a captivity. But I can look at someone else and say, it's your free choice. There's no captivity. It's your free choice to gluttonously consume sugar. That's not the same as my issue that I'm captive to. We can struggle to empathize. But the question is, how do we define need in people? Jesus says to help all of those in need, and we can too often get tempted into arguing about what defines a need. What defines a need in someone? We're going to go in a moment to a consideration that is going to possibly challenge many people, and many may tune it out today. But if you hear anything from today before I move on, this is what I pray that you hear today. Those with need, in the moment we encounter them, no arguing over the source of the need, the history, anything else. Those in need, in the moment we meet them, that is Jesus staying near to us and serving us. And as we want to stand in judgment of the sheep and the goats in this parable, Jesus says, I've never been from one further away than from the other. You both encountered me equally. Neither of you recognized me. Neither the sheep or the goats. Neither one of you recognized me. I'm the God who is embodied in the least people among you. And I'm even embodied in your own needs. So that when you encounter need, I'm there. So Jesus' parable on its surface, it invites us to judge each other as sheep and goats. Who's the sheep? Who are the goats? And I look out through the world and I decide who they're the goats. I'm the sheep. But beneath the surface, it invites us to ask the question that the sheep and the goats both ask too late. Where is Jesus all around us? And where is Jesus in my own needs right now? The question they ask too late is, wait, what do you look like? We never recognized you. And beneath its surface, this parable calls us to realize that Jesus is always near to both, the sheep and the goats. If this is final judgment, as many Bibles label it, we have to consider that neither the sheep nor the goats knew even what they were coming into the judgment, because they couldn't recognize the thing that was happening by which they would even be distinguished. This shouldn't fill us with fear of uncertainty. Am I a sheep? Am I a goat? How do I know if I can't recognize what I'm being judged for? Shouldn't fill us with fear of uncertainty, because we now have come to know through the life of Jesus the mercy by which he judges. What it should do, though, when this parable shows that neither the sheep nor the goats know who they are, stop trying to figure it out and just trust the good judge and do the next right thing. It should make us stop trying to figure out who the sheep and the goats are. The sheep and the goats, they can't tell, and all that's left for us to do, rather than try to figure out who's out, who's in, it's what's the next thing for me in my life to do. If we want to claim that we can tell who the sheep and the goats are, and if we want to dine on that fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and we judge people, then we are faced here with final judgment is not based upon religiosity or even being able to know and identify Jesus. Final judgment is based upon identifying those in need around us and treating them with love. St. Anthony the Great from the 200s, he said, "Our life and our death is with our neighbor. If we gain our brother, we have gained God. But if we neglect our brother, we've sinned against Christ." So we're going to pick up now with those pesky goats. The ones who fail to help the needs that they encounter, who are in need, and something that I never do because I'm a sheep. I don't fail to meet the needs around me because I am one of the chosen, saved sheep. But Jesus, he sends these goats off to what almost all of our Bibles call eternal punishment. Let me see. I guess all my slides are broken on here. So maybe this will work. Hold on, give me a minute here. Let's see. There we go. I got it. See if we go to the next slide. There we go. Jesus sends the goats off to what almost all of our Bibles call eternal punishment. We read, and those goats, they go away to this eternal punishment. But the righteous, the sheep, we go to eternal life. We didn't ignore any need around us, so we get judged correctly as righteous. In the Greek, it actually reads that the goats go away to these two Greek words, aionios, kolesis. The first word we've looked at already. It's related to the ending of the temple age. It's where we last looked at it seriously. This first word comes from the term aeon, which refers to the age. It's the end of the age. It's an age of time that we conceive of as a significant period of time. Sometimes an age is very short. Sometimes it's long. It doesn't have a set time limit. Aionios just simply refers to the period of time given to that age. Very often it's spoken of in an open-ended manner because from where we are in history, looking at even our age, we don't know where the end is from our vision. So we speak of it as open-ended. So what we read in the parable is that the goats head towards the time allotted to the age of kolesis. But there's a problem with the second word. It's often translated as torment or punishment. And we picture hell as this place of forever pain without resolution. And the second word has been grievously misunderstood. There are three important words in Greek to know when it comes to what happens at the end of our lives. We're going to look at all three of them in a few weeks as we go into another message series. But for today, we're going to look at a couple, and one of those words is kolesis. It's the word that we see here in the Greek. The second word that's important is timoria. Timoria is how we in the U.S. do punishment. It is for the satisfaction of the one who's been wronged. It makes me feel better when this person who wronged me now gets their punishment. Timoria sets right the victim and the system. We'll go into this further in some weeks, but the Strong's Lexicon says this. We'll use this as a basic starting point. Kolesis, what we have with the goats, differs from timoria, as kolesis is that which is disciplinary and has reference to the one who is suffering the discipline, while timoria is penal and references the satisfaction of the one who inflicts the penalty. Timoria is punishing someone for my self-benefit, and it's only spoken of in Scripture to come from human beings. It is what humans do to each other. In the Reformed school of thought, for example, though, God, he often sends people to eternal hellfire for the sake of his own glory. But Timoria is never used for God. God doesn't punish for his own sake. God does not punish to satisfy anything about himself. And this completely removes satisfaction-style atonements. What God does is referenced as cholesis, what is going to happen to the goats, and it's not for the benefit of the one doing it. The purpose of cholesis is to serve others. Its purpose is to change someone. The actual meaning of this Greek word is correction, and it's connected to the pruning of a plant. It's connected to the pruning of a plant where you remove the parts of the plant that are not beneficial for the growth of the plant. Plato, he uses this word cholesis. He puts this word forward as experiencing a punishment that is a blessing. Because the punishment is designed to free me from falsities about myself. Plato uses this word to speak of medicinal punishment that will cure me, that will make me well. Think of something like chemotherapy or the resetting of a broken bone that is painful, but it improves me. That is, we go through these unpleasant feelings that feel unpleasant to us to the end of making us whole and healthy. So again, this word, it carries the meaning of pruning plants to remove what's necessary for their optimum health. We go to a doctor to be pruned from ailments that need to be taken off for us to be healthy. Philo was a great Jewish theologian. He was believed to have some influence on the Apostle Paul, and he's also informed a lot of Christianity. Philo spoke of cholesis in a medical sense. He spoke of it as the painful things that need to happen to me to work just like remedies of a physician to cure me of foolishness. Plato says that for our foolishness, cholesis is as great as the remedies of a physician to fix me and make me well. So that what Jesus is actually saying of the goats here is they are heading to their healing. These goats are heading to a time allotted to their correction, to their pruning, to their soul healing, medical care. We're going to explore this in a few weeks more time. But since the beginning of the church, wide swaths of the church, they actually didn't hold to an eternal hell. They didn't hold to the hell that many modern evangelicals hold to. In our modern era around the world, much of the church still doesn't hold to actually an eternal hell. What the early church saw, what they saw very often was they saw that everyone would be purified, healed of what ails us. All through the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus has always talked about sin as a sickness, as a captivity, as something that oppresses us and is wrong with us. They said that we would be healed of what ails us, and the image of God that every single human being has, no matter how sin sick they are, the gold of that image would be brought out in the end. The modern church in America has moved to almost a sense of Jesus is my ticket to bypass the fires. I get to bypass the fires of hell with Jesus as my ticket. And the unsaved, they're going to go to the forever fire. But we've considered in 1 Corinthians 3:15 that the Apostle Paul says we're all going to go through fire. And what its purpose is to purify us. Kenneth Tanner on this note says that from the Bible and the teachings of the early church, we're taught to welcome the judgment of God, the one who alone can, without harm, remove the weeds from the wheat of my virtues. And he can harvest the wheat from my vices, who will, with sanctifying fire, make us the humans he intended us to be. St. Ambrose, he was a theologian in the 300s, and he was massively instrumental in the early church. He spoke of those who, by grace, they would get to avoid the more painful processes of judgment compared to those who are not ready at all. But then he speaks of those who are given over to a time of discipline for their benefit, so they can become what they're meant to be. This can feel foreign to many in the American Christian church, because we've come to a Christianity that's much different from historical Christianity, or even Christianity around the world. Stanley Hauerwas is one of my favorite theologians, and he was hailed as one of the greatest theologians who's still living. A while back, he was named America's greatest theologian. He points to the problem of American theology when he said that Protestant Christians, they set out to make America Christian, but they ended up making Christianity American. So now much of historical Christianity and global Christianity is foreign to us. But just so you understand that my reading here is not the minority view that is obscure and something that I'm making up, I want to bring some quotes into this, some more quotes. George MacDonald, he was C.S. Lewis's spiritual mentor. He said, "The very fire of hell is the fire of God's love. It's a love that will burn the evil out of you." St. Isaac of Nineveh, some also know him as St. Isaac the Syrian, he said, "It is not the way of a compassionate maker to create rational beings in order to deliver them over mercilessly to unending affliction as punishment for things he knew they would do even before he made them." Clement of Alexandria, he was another big part of the early church. He taught, "The Lord is the atoning sacrifice, not for our own sins only, those of us in the church, that is, the sins of the faithful, but also atoning for the sins of the whole world. Therefore, God indeed saves all universally, but some are converted by punishment, correction, others by voluntary submission." Origen said, "We think indeed that the goodness of God through his Christ will recall all his creatures to one end. Even his enemies will be conquered and subdued, because Christ will reign until all come under his feet." St. Jerome said, "It benefits the character of the triune God, who is good, simple, and unchanging, to believe that every creature at the end of all will be restored to the state within which it had been first created." Here's a few from the 300s, and then we'll look at the words of Paul. St. Gregory of Nyssa, he said, "Wherefore, at the same time, liberty of free will should be left to nature, and yet the evil purged away. Here's the wisdom of God, that God made this plan to suffer humans to do what they're going to do. That then, having tasted evil, the humans would then experience the wretchedness with which they had chosen. And they would return of their own will back to the first blessedness. And here's how humans return: either being purged in this life through prayer, through discipline, or after their death, through the furnace of cleansing fire. Another saint put it this way: for the wicked there are punishments, not perpetual. However, lest the immortality prepared for them should be at disadvantage, they are to be purified by a brief period, according to the amount of malice in their works. They shall therefore suffer punishment for a short space, but immortal blessedness, having no end, awaits them. The penalties to be inflicted for their many and grave sins are far surpassed by the magnitude of the mercy that will be shown them. Finally, one more saint said, let us have no doubts then that the God who saves all humanity is the true and perfect one, for his goodness is unlimited, and his justice requires that no soul will be saved or will be lost. As we turn to the Apostle Paul, keep in mind that this isn't universalism in the sense that nothing matters what we do, nothing matters what we believe, but we're going to speak about that in coming weeks. For now, though, we turn to the Apostle Paul in Romans 5. Therefore, just as one man's trespass led to condemnation for all, so one man's act of righteousness leads to justification and life for all. For just through one man's disobedience, all were made sinners. So through one man's obedience, all are made righteous. I believe that the Jewish religious leaders, they understood what Jesus is saying here more than his own disciples. This is Matthew's theme, which is the disciples and those who think they're in. They don't get it. But those outside, they get it better. The religious leaders, I believe, get it better than Jesus' disciples and better than many today. And because they understood what Jesus was bringing, we go into Matthew 26 and we read, when Jesus had finished all these things, the religious leaders gathered to conspire, how do we kill Jesus? And Judas makes his arrangements to betray Jesus. And as we've considered in the past, it's likely on the heels of what the disciples misunderstood as revolution talk by Jesus. As Jesus tells of the coming destruction of the temple, and the disciples are ready for the revolution, Judas isn't expecting Jesus to die. Judas attempts to betray Jesus to light off the revolution. He wants to force Jesus' hand. Judas is actually shocked, and he's dismayed at what happens by his actions. It's not what he was expecting. Jesus heads off to celebrate the Passover. And on this, the fifth and final discourse of Jesus, Matthew does something different. At the end of each discourse, Matthew says something to the effect of, when Jesus finished saying this time, Matthew has the Greek word all. The word all indicates that everything Jesus had said is now done. When Jesus had finished saying all these things, Matthew's calling out all the discourses of Jesus. Jesus wrapped up his verbal teaching now as a whole. And Jesus is now going to go and enact his teaching. And then we come to this beautiful scene at the anointing of Bethany when a woman anoints Jesus' feet with his costly ointment. The Greek word is miron, from the word myrrh. It's everything Jesus has said up to this point. It becomes a parenthetical now. When this woman anoints Jesus' feet with myrrh on, it calls us back to the myrrh of the Magi. It reconnects Jesus' childhood with what Jesus is going to do next. I want to highlight. You know what? It's Holy Week, so we can spend a little more time if you'll bear with me. I want to highlight something that to me is beautiful on this Palm Sunday at this moment of anointing Jesus. I'm going to limit it to this one thing. So Matthew leaves the woman anonymous who anoints Jesus' feet. The men are out to get Jesus, or Jesus' own men, they're going to fail him. In the middle of this, Matthew introduces us to three anonymous women in chapter 26. The first nameless one, she anoints Jesus. She anoints his head with oil. And she shows that she can see where Jesus is going. I anoint you because I understand what's going to happen. The same myrrh that was his kingly gift from the Magi is now preparing him for his death. The next nameless woman is the first female slave who approaches Peter and says, I know you. You were with Jesus the Galilean. This woman identifies Jesus with his ministry, and Peter denies it. A third nameless woman, another female slave, approaches Peter again. Oh yeah, I know this dude. He was with Jesus from Nazareth. She identifies Jesus with his origins. While the men fight, while the men surrender and cowardly run off, three nameless women have just preached the life of Jesus. They point to his start, to his ministry, and the first woman anoints him for what is ahead. Jesus is not just in solidarity with the marginalized, with the least. He is identified with them and embedded in them. And they inherently preach him to us. Just like these three women. Well, everybody else is distracted and fighting and arguing. Am I going to be the one to betray him? No, you are. I love it. Anyway, we'll continue on. For the last couple of weeks here, we've been considering how Jesus cares more about getting people to realize how loved they are than he cares about them believing that he is right or about getting them to be right. This is the dinner dynamic of Jesus' love. And at the Last Supper, Jesus declares that one of you is going to betray me. First, for the one who will betray him, Jesus' declaration sends this additional message. One of you is going to betray me, and yet I love you, and you have not been cut out. You are still within my love, at my table, and within my circle. Paul records later, Jesus is faithful even when we're faithless, because he cannot deny himself. Jesus' declaration that one of you is going to betray me also invites his apostles into one of the greatest lessons of us versus them thinking. Instantly, when Jesus says, one of you will betray me, at least 11 out of the 12 start to argue, it's not me. It's not me. And they begin to look at each other and think, who's the goat in here that shouldn't be in here? I'm a sheep. I'm good. I'm certainly not going to betray him. Who's the bad one who doesn't belong? And they spiral into us versus them thinking, in versus out, deserving versus undeserving. Meanwhile, Jesus' time of love at the table has placed no one in or out of this group. And as 11 of the 12 rest on their certainty that none of them are a goat, they do not realize that the goat in all of them will be exposed soon, as they will come to all betray Jesus and flee. The lesson of God from that first communion stands ready to dawn on them. Jesus knew that none of them would do right by him. Jesus knew that he was going to the cross just as much for the actions of each of them as he was going due to the actions of Judas. Come on up, Nate. We're going to close here. The last lesson of Jesus to his disciples is not the famous quote of looking to the bad guy, them, and saying, I thank God that by his grace, I'm not a sinner. The more modern take that many know, look at that guy. There go I, but by the grace of God, it's not. The last lesson of Jesus is to look at Judas and to say, there go I too. But thank God for his grace that still loves me. The sheep and the goats is in each of us. Jesus loves us all. He invites us all to his table. Holy Week shows a God who says, even though you betray me and kill me, I'll eat with you. I'll share my bowl of food with you. And it teaches us a final lesson in not falling into us versus them thinking. Jesus didn't come here to save us from them. He came here to save me from what's wrong with me. He's a God who heals. He's a God who prunes and takes out the things that are not of love in me. That's who God is.